It is our number 2. That's drive time right here on the show that shakes the Southland. Clemson Sports Talk. Lawton Swan hanging out with you. And of course, on a Monday afternoon, as he does every week at 5 o'clock, William Qualkenbush joins the program. Follow this man on Twitter at Qualk Talk. Qualk, welcome in. Hope you had a great weekend. What's going on, big guy?
Oh, Swanee, just putting away some boxes. That's what we do when we decorate for Christmas. We put away some boxes, and that's really all I do now. Is I just I take boxes off the shelves and I replace them with other boxes. How are you, my friend? You doing okay?
I'm good. So you're just the box putter upper guy? That sounds a lot better than the tree decorator guy.
You know what? The tree decorating is done. That's light work compared to the boxes because I don't know if you know this, but they don't stack as well as you took them down. And that is really frustrating. So,
Yeah, listen, I
dealing
said
with
the
that
next time I get a
frustration with
new
clenched
Christmas
fists.
tree, I'm a fake Christmas tree guy. The next time I get a fake Christmas tree, we're just gonna put it in the garage and cover it during the year because getting that bad boy back in that box, now that is a work of genius.
Co-sign that. We're doing a fake tree for the first time this year because I was gone over Thanksgiving and then I was gone again. We just really didn't have a chance to go get one. And we've already devised a plan. So, needless to say, I think we're on the same page with the fake tree storage.
Well, the little lights aren't twinkling, Clark. All right, Qualkenbush hanging out with us here on a Monday. And so, Qualk, yesterday was a monumental day in a multitude of ways in terms of the history of the college football playoff. The 4-team version, number 1, an undefeated Power 5 champion. Florida State left out. Georgia, the former number 1 team, falling all the way out to the 6th spot. A lot to digest from it all, but I saw something, and I listen, there's a ton of ways you can look at it. But I saw somebody say this, and I thought, man, that is pretty brilliant. If the College Football Playoff Committee really evaluates things the way they say, explain to me how Georgia is still behind Florida State, given the fact that the committee believes that Alabama should be ahead of the Seminoles.
Swanee, it's a great point. I actually think that's the crux of the issue. Because, and here's why. We get all hot and bothered by the basketball committee, right? I mean, the joke at our station is that whatever the committee doesn't think is super important this year is the thing that Clemson's going to do really well, right? Because Clemson just doesn't, whatever it is, when they care about non-conference schedules, Clemson's got, when they don't care about non-conference schedules, Clemson has a great one. When they don't care about quad 1 wins, Clemson has a great, so like all that stuff, when they really care about quality or bad losses, Clemson has everything else, but they've got a bunch of bad losses. And so from year to year, it's hard to plan. It's hard to schedule to the net rating, and it's hard to schedule to the committee. That is a piece of cake compared to this college football playoff committee where they contradict themselves week after week and even place after place. And I'll give you a great example, and I'll get back to your original point. Last night, whatever night, I don't even know what day it is. Well, yesterday afternoon, boy, Sunday was long.
Yeah.
Yesterday afternoon, the committee comes out with their rankings, and Florida State won all their games. And you know what? It just wasn't good enough, wasn't good enough. And you know what? I'm okay with that. I can see, I disagree wholeheartedly. I think it's horrible for the game and basically puts college football on life support what they did. But you know what? At least I understand the logical premise by which you could say Florida State's a shell of itself without the starting quarterback. Alabama looks like a better team, even though they didn't 2 weeks ago. It's fine, whatever. And so, okay, we're going to leave them out. All right, you know what? If you believe that, I totally disagree. But that is a fine logical premise to take because I can follow your logic. And then we get down to the group of 5. And you know the logical premise by which they put Liberty in over SMU and a couple other teams? This is from Boo Corrigan, the chair of the committee, who has the worst job in the world when he has to actually stand up there and make sense of all of these people who contradict themselves every single way. Like, Boo gets the slings and arrows, but really he has the worst job because he has to know in his heart this doesn't make sense. He says they picked Liberty over SMU because, quote, they just kept winning, close quote. That was it, Swanee. Just win your games, and you can be the G5 representative, but just win your games doesn't get you in the college football playoff. I don't understand how in the same poll you
Yeah.
can prioritize winning all your games one spot, and then you don't prioritize winning all your games another spot because you decided that a team wasn't going to win a fictitious matchup. That's where I have a major, major problem with this. Now, to your original question, I told you I was going to get back to it. If you're going to be consistent and you're going to put the 4 best teams in, how are you going to knock Georgia off of the top 4 when they were number 1 and they got beat by a team that was already 8 and is now in your playoff field? How are you going to say Texas, who beat an Oklahoma State team that has been blown out now 3 times this year and probably should have been woefully knocked down, how are you going to have Texas move up 4 spots because on the best scale? Georgia moves down 5. I don't understand how you justify either one of those. Why is Georgia now worse than Ohio State? Or why is Ohio State worse than I can't remember who I'm saying. Oregon. Like what? Like what do you do with those teams? It doesn't make any sense. Why is Florida State only dropped to 5? If you're going to drop them, why do they only drop to 5? And why did they only drop this week?
Yeah.
Why didn't you go ahead if you're just ranking best and you thought that Florida State looked crappy last week and it wasn't just about this week, where, by the way, they won their conference title game by a wider margin than, I don't know, Oregon. They won their conference title game by a larger margin than
Alabama. Yeah.
I mean, they had basically the same passing numbers the last 2 weeks as Michigan did. So, like, if it's a matter of best, why didn't you knock them down beforehand? It's because they make it up as they go along and they contradict themselves in the same poll by what they do at number 1 and number 5 and number 10 and number 20. It doesn't make any sense. It is a total sham process. And, you know, the only thing, and I know it's a long answer, Swanee. You've lit my fuse here. The only thing that I think was a redeeming value about this committee is that it seemed to be the only entity that was looking out for the good of the game. Nobody else looking out for the good. All the conferences looking out for themselves, schools looking out for themselves, networks looking out for themselves. Nobody cares about the game except the committee, where they were saying best, but they were actually prioritizing the results on the field and the conference championships, and they were only going to best if that standard didn't suffice. When they prioritized best as a totally subjective measure over deserving, they acted outside the best interest of the game. I think Kirk Herbstreit has been a great voice on behalf of the game of college football. I think this week he fell woefully short because he did the exact same thing. He sacrificed the good of the game and precedent and setting the game up for success in the future as everybody else trying to make it something else and tear it down. He decided that he would rather prioritize subjective best over objective most deserving. And I don't even care as much about it in this case as I do about what it means for future cases. I think it is horrific for the sport of college football.
Well, you know, when Clemson's played Alabama in the college football playoff, the expectation has been that Alabama was the favorite and that they were going to beat the Tigers and they were going to dominate Clemson out in California. And we all know how that went. I thought a year ago when TCU got into the playoffs, I thought, man, you know what? I don't think they're going to be able to get the job done. And everybody kind of held against them that they got blown out in the championship game, but they forgot that they put up 51 points, maybe against Michigan. And mind you, with Michigan sitting there at number 1, I got to really question the offenses in the Big Ten and quite frankly, to some respect, some of the defenses in that league. But when you see TCU light Michigan up for 51, and then you go look at what they gave up the rest of the year, it's like, is that really, is that really the standard? Is that the best team this year? Was that the second best team a year ago? I just don't believe that they are. And when you're putting, these lists together, I understand there's going to be a fan base or whatever that's unhappy. But Qualk, you nailed it. If Florida State was so bad without Jordan Travis, why did they hold on to their spot a week ago? Why didn't they fall? Why is Georgia still behind them? That's what makes no sense to me. All right, so let's turn our attention away because obviously these are the matchups that we've got. The other thing that I think never gets factored in and should, you can't tell me, and I know you can't, look to the future, but you can't tell me that McCarthy's not going to get hurt for Michigan. You can't tell me that a key player is not going to be out for somebody else. And you'll say, well, Swanee, you can't, you can't deal in hypotheticals. But isn't that exactly what the committee did? They just hypothetically believe Florida State can't win the first game. I think Florida State could beat Michigan, if I'm being honest with you.
Well, I mean, look, I would agree with you. And listen, here's what I think is true. Okay, and I'm gonna do this thing where I put on a cloak of humility, and I need your audience to just assume that it's sincere. Okay, that I'm not doing the false humility here. We pick games all the time. I give out picks against the spread. I tell you who's going to win straight up. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong, but most of the time I try to be as convicted as I possibly can be. There is incredible hubris to thinking that you're so sure of an outcome that you'd rather not even see that game played. Now,
right.
if you're asking me, would I rather watch Michigan, Alabama versus Michigan, Florida State? I would rather watch Michigan, Alabama, because I have my doubts about that Florida State team, regardless of if anything else happens, going up against that Michigan team. I don't think that would be a fair fight. But, Swanee, there were 10 conference championship games played in FBS football this weekend. 4 of them were won by underdogs. Now, look, there were varying degrees of underdogs, but like Oregon was a 9-point favorite against Washington. That is not insignificant. I think Florida State would probably be a 16 or 17-point underdog, something like that maybe, by the time you kick the ball off against Michigan. That's pretty significant, right? That's not insignificant. But it doesn't mean you're going to win the game if you're favored by that much.
Right.
Again, the lesson that we should have learned from TCU is not that you get bludgeoned to death in the championship game. It's that you can win as an underdog in a Final Four. You can win as an underdog, as a team without as many 4 stars and 5 stars, a team that just kind of finds it on a given night. And the favorite maybe has a bad day, doesn't do some things that it's been doing the whole year. All that kind of stuff. To me, that is what we take from TCU. We're taking the wrong thing away if we think, well, TCU got blown out. Guess who else has been blown out in the playoffs, Swanee? Everybody. Everybody gets blown out in the semifinals of the playoff. I laugh at the notion that the committee's trying to protect the semifinal from blowouts. Like teams like Oklahoma and Notre Dame and Ohio State and Clemson and all these other things have not been blown out. I mean, how many times have we lamented how both semifinals have been absolute trash? We've done it almost more years than we've talked about how great the semifinals are.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's laughable that all of a sudden we're now starting to use the committee to protect the matchups. You know what I hope, and I don't hope this when I'm sitting down to watch it, but I hope that just from the hubris and from the arrogance that it takes to think that you can engineer a result beforehand in a sport as wild and wacky and crazy as college football, I hope these games are 40-10. I don't care who wins. I hope they're 40-10, just to prove the point once again that even though you're trying to engineer good games, you're better off just letting the chips fall where they may, because that's what makes college football great.
I think I can make people, though, by the way, follow him on Twitter at Qualk Talk right now, William Qualkenbush. So I think I can make people at least say, oh, you know what? I'm kind of glad the committee put Alabama in over Florida State. Michigan, Qualk, is the team that everybody wants to see lose because of the situation with the scandal that surrounded that program this year. Did you see Michigan's reaction when Alabama popped up at that 4th spot? I'll tell you what, if anything might have happened with that maneuver is we may have eliminated Michigan from the competition, if you will.
You know, I tweeted this, and I was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but the more I think about it, you know, Kirk Herbstreit is an Ohio State alum, and Joey Galloway is an Ohio State alum, and everybody's got to kind of go along to get along with the Michigan thing because they were up there ranked, and they weren't going to do anything about it and all this stuff. But now we're getting down to the nitty-gritty. And I said, again, I was a little tongue-in-cheek, but, like, if the committee decided we don't want to do the Michigan thing, we don't want to talk about Michigan for an entire week leading into a national championship game, God forbid they win it and we have to talk about it then. We have to give Jim Harbaugh that trophy. And then whatever happens with the FBI and with the NCAA and everything else going on there, there's way more smoke than you would need to call it a fire. I mean, they called 911 at Michigan, right? I mean, we all know they've done quite a bit. If they haven't done everything they've been accused of, they've done quite a bit of it. And so, you know, if they kind of did this to keep Michigan from winning, as I put my tinfoil hat on for a second, right, I would almost be okay with that from on a moral grounds. But they're not saying that, and until they say that, I'm going to assume they didn't do that. You're right. The side effect is actually good for the game, unless you're a Michigan fan, because everybody knows that Michigan's a fraud. Everybody knows they cheated like crazy. You can actually see as Connor Stallions got fired, and even when they started playing even when they started playing better games, their offense started getting a little worse, and their defense started getting a little worse, and they weren't quite as automatic as they were early in the season 20, which is quite interesting indeed. I do think most people will be rooting for Alabama, even if they disagree with their inclusion, because I think there's been that sort of backlash to what Michigan has been accused of and what they, quite frankly, have been doing over the past couple of seasons.
So Alabama opens as an underdog, a slight underdog to Michigan. Qualk, I got a text earlier today from a buddy of mine, and you may already know this. Do you know who the last non-SEC team that was a favorite over Alabama was?
Let me see. Was it Clemson 2008?
You got it.
Yeah, baby.
I mean, you got to dig into the 15-year archive for that one, Qualk.
I was at that game. I tried to forget it, but people like you keep bringing it up, though. So I got to keep being reminded.
Well, again, he is William Qualkenbush. Every day, noon until 3 o'clock. Alabama's with Qualk and Ben, a 105.5 The Roar in the Upstate. I try to catch him when I can. I normally get the last 30 minutes, Qualk, with my daily schedule, but I do try to check in on you guys and see what you're talking about. And I hope our listeners will give you a listen. If they can't catch you live, catch his podcast as well. All right. So the other story, and, I think you and I were talking off the air. We could have talked about a million things. We got 3 minutes. So Georgia is out of the college football playoff. No three-peat in Athens. Your response to what's happened on that front?
Well, I mean, my first response, which is I kind of think Georgia was still a top 4 team the way things have played out this year. But unfortunately, only Alabama gets the benefit of, maybe you're not, but we'll put you in anyway. Nobody else gets that. Florida State gets dinged, but Alabama gets in. Here's what happened to Georgia. The law of averages caught up with Georgia. Look, Clemson. We know Clemson had great injury luck for several years, and they've not enjoyed as much injury luck now. Georgia had mostly great injury luck. Not that nobody got hurt, but the guys that got hurt were at positions where they were deep. You lose guys from your linebacking core where you got a million linebackers, or defensive line, you got a million defensive linemen. But you lose Brock Bowers, you lose Ladd McConkey, and those guys are less than 100% when you're going against a relatively healthy Alabama team. You're going to get dinged. And listen, I know Georgia fans don't want to talk about this. In 2021, Mechie and Williams both were out in the second half of the national championship game. Georgia probably loses to Alabama in 21 if those guys are healthy. And in 22, they are losing by double digits to Ohio State when Marvin Harrison Jr. gets hurt in the back of the end zone, and they end up rolling back and winning that game. They don't even play for national championship last year. So it was the injury luck that Georgia benefited from, on top of being very, very good, that kind of came back to bite him in this game. And it was also, I think, Nick Saban winning a way in which he was familiar, which is a little more ground and pound, a little more of a big play passing game, but not the reliance on the pass is to get 10 yards for a first down, and a physical defense that reminds you of the early 2010s Alabama defenses. It was a really good game. I enjoyed watching it, and I think Georgia will be back. But again, it's just sort of a thing that happens to most teams, but hadn't happened to Georgia the last couple of years. I think is the culprit.
Qualk, we got about 30 seconds, and I didn't get a chance to talk to you about the coaching hires. Can you hang on with us for a few more minutes?
Yeah, man, sure. Let's do it.
Back at it on a Monday, the show that shakes the Southland. A little holdover, a little 7-minute segment here with William Qualkenbush to wrap it up, because there were a couple of significant hires today in Tigertown. If you've been following along over on our website, ClemsonSportsTalk.com, you know the news that broke about 9 a.m. Matt Luke, the former Ole Miss head coach and assistant at Georgia. He's had other stops in the ACC and SEC. Is going to be the new offensive line coach, and a familiar name to not just Tiger fans, but Gamecocks as well. Chris Rumpf returns to Clemson to head up the defensive ends. So, Qualk, what are your takeaways from the additions that Clemson had here over the past 24 hours or so?
Well, first of all, I don't know Lemansky Hall very well. Always had positive interactions with him. I do know Thomas Austin pretty well. I've known him for a long time. And he's a really good human being, got a great family, great Clemson family. And so what I actually said to people is, with Lemansky Hall, I felt like there were some, defensive ends that struggled a bit to stay healthy and develop. And I really thought Clemson could upgrade there. I was curious where Dabo Swinney pinpointed in terms of offense, in terms of places to upgrade. And I said, if you're gonna fire my friend, you need to make sure you upgrade. And I think Clemson really did. I mean, look, Chris Rump. I was glad to hear the stories about Dabo sort of going after him in the past, because I know they did not part on good terms when, in Dabo's mind, Chris Rump abandoned ship back in 2010 after the 2010 season to go and win some natties with Alabama. I would say they were not on very good terms when they ended there. I think that's a pretty poorly kept secret around these parts right now. And so I feel like that's a bit of an upgrade there, putting Rump with Eason, two guys that are more than capable of coaching the entire defensive line. I think that is a major, major step forward for this defense. I think that will help elevate that defensive end group and get you back to more of a developmental arc there. As far as the offensive line coach, I don't think there's any greater testament to Clemson's culture and what Dabo has done and what he's built than a guy who was burnt out from the game. He wanted to spend more time with his family, didn't want the relentless recruiting calendar. And this is not a guy that didn't want to work. Like, Matt Luke is a great recruiter, and he's a great offensive line coach, but he just got burnt out with the constant demands. He comes back to a program where you can see your kids during the week. And he comes back to a program where family is a big part, not just of the sales pitch, but of the everyday life. And it's a program where you can still be in big-time college football, but you can also sort of do some of the things that he missed in big-time college football at other stops. This is a guy with head coaching experience in the SEC. This is a guy who's reeled in 5-star offensive linemen. He has elevated and developed guys that were 3 stars, guys that were 4 stars, and guys that were 5 stars. This is the one way to sort of break that cycle that people have talked about, where Clemson hasn't put a lot of guys in the draft, can't get a first-round pick, hard time with 5-star linemen, except for guys who have weird measurables like a Mitch Hyatt or something like that. I think this is a perfect way to try to shed that stereotype and get some dogs in here and start winning some big boy recruiting battles up front by getting somebody with immediate credibility that's won those battles and that's developed those guys. I think Matt Luke is one of the most important hires that since Dabo Swinney's been here. I think he's going to fit hand in glove with the staff and with the culture at Clemson. I think people are going to love the way the offensive line plays. I'm very excited to see what happens on the recruiting trail and what happens, especially with some of the first and second year guys that are on the offensive line right now, and what changes with their developmental arc. Because I think Rump is going to be good. I think Matt Luke is going to be absolutely elite on the offensive line.
I mean, were you surprised at all that they didn't just let Nick Eason? Because I had kind of talked about that here on the program, that I felt like Nick Eason could have probably coached and recruited both defensive ends and the defensive tackles, and then maybe bring in a linebacker coach and free up some of that from Wes Goodwin to let him do a little more, kind of game day ops.
Well, yes. I mean, a couple things on that. First of all, in talking to a couple folks around the program, I think Nick Eason would have accepted that challenge gladly. Dabo Swinney, I think it was Dan Brooks that put it on Dabo Swinney's, put it in his mind that having a different D tackle and D ends coach is the right way to go. So it shows that Dabo still believes in his organization. He's willing to change and adjust, but he likes his organization. I said they might should have gone and hired a proper special teams coordinator. I think Clemson would benefit from winning more games that way. I thought about maybe, moving Tyler Grisham to inside receivers and going to outside receivers and having 6 offensive coaches as opposed to 4 defensive coaches. There were several ways it could have gone.
I didn't think about that, but I like that idea too, Qualk, honestly.
And you know what? There were some folks who said, you're not going to do that with a tight end coach and an inside receivers coach and an outside receivers coach. And I get that. A lot of the air raid offenses that do inside and outside don't really have tight ends. The point is they had options. Dabo decided to stick with his preferred organizational strategy for his staff and hire somebody that's been to Clemson, that's a South Carolina native, big boy recruiting, big boy development, NFL accolades. You're talking about checking all the boxes, and a guy that Dabo is personally very familiar with, and they have a very good relationship. Not to mention, it appears that Wes Goodwin and Nick Eason have very good relationships with Chris Rump as well. I think that they had an opportunity maybe to do some changes if they wanted to, but if you can keep the existing structure and you can fill that hole that currently exists with something better, that's lasting, that's stable, that's going to give you a better result, that's going to recruit at an elite level, that's going to coach at an elite level with a track record at a bunch of different places, including the NFL, I think they did what they needed to do. If you weren't, let me put it this way: if you weren't going to make any structural changes with your staff, Chris Rump's exactly the kind of guy to hire to elevate that position.
Again, follow him on Twitter at Qualk Talk Qualk, buddy. We always appreciate you, my man.
Thanks, Juan.